So World War II, it's hard to really overstate how much that period changed things.
Absolutely. Not just globally, but right here at home in the
Yes.
United
Yeah,
States.
exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, specifically how the war affected um, minority groups within American society.
Hmm.
We got some really interesting pieces to look at here.
That's right. Because when we think about World War II, often the focus is like the battles overseas, right?
Mhm.
But the war years, they were also a time of profound social shifts here in America,
Yeah.
especially for minority communities.
Ifs, meaning challenges
Oh,
or
no, really. They faced unique challenges, definitely, but also found some maybe unexpected opportunities. It's complex.
Okay, let's start with an image I think many people know. Rosie the Riveter.
Ah, yes, Rose.
This woman, strong, capable. She became this symbol of women stepping into factory jobs, right?
Yes.
Roles usually held by men.
That's the one.
How did this image and just the reality of women entering these jobs, how did that affect minority women?
Well, what's interesting there is that while the main image of Rosie was typically a white woman,
Right.
the massive need for workers did open doors for many women of color, too. African American women, for instance, moved into manufacturing jobs in like really large numbers.
Okay, so opportunity there.
Yes, but, and this is important, they often face discrimination based on race and gender.
So a double challenge.
Exactly. They were doing absolutely crucial work, same as their white counterparts, but, frequently under tougher conditions, and often for less pay.
Wow. So the opportunity wasn't exactly equal then.
Not at all. It really highlights the complexities of the time. Opportunity existed, but alongside deep-seated prejudice.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that those iconic images, they don't always capture the full picture.
Definitely not.
Okay, so moving on from Rosie. The war also seems to have sparked some pretty powerful activism here at home. Let's talk about A. Philip Randolph. Who was he, and what was his role during this period?
A. Philip Randolph. He was a really major figure, a key labor leader, and a very passionate civil rights activist.
Mhm.
He saw that the booming war industries, that could be a chance for Black Americans to gain some economic footing.
Makes sense. Leverage the moment.
Right. So to push for that, he organized the March on Washington movement. This was back in 1941.
1941, before the U.S. even officially entered the war after Pearl Harbor.
Exactly. The goal was to protest the widespread racial discrimination that was keeping African Americans out of good defense jobs and also facing segregation in the military.
Planning a march on Washington then.
Hmm.
That must have felt like a pretty bold move.
Oh, incredibly bold. Imagine the pressure, the climate of the time.
So what happened? Did the march happen?
Well, the threat of the march was incredibly powerful. It put huge pressure on President Roosevelt. The country is mobilizing for war. The last thing he wanted was a massive protest potentially disrupting the Capitol.
Right, the optics would be terrible.
Precisely. So, faced with this possibility, Roosevelt ultimately issued Executive Order 8802.
So the movement achieved its goal without the march itself.
In essence, yes. It shows how effective organized, direct action or even the credible threat of it can be.
Okay, Executive Order 8802. What did that actually do?
It was a really big step. It basically banned discriminatory hiring practices by federal agencies
Okay.
and also by any companies that had government contracts for defense work.
So private companies, too, if they worked with the government.
Yes, if they had defense contracts. The order stated there should be no discrimination based on race, creed, color, or national origin in those jobs.
That sounds landmark.
Like
It really was. It was the first time the federal government took such a direct stance against employment discrimination, a major precedent.
So a big win. And this led to, was it the FEPC, the Fair Employment Practices Committee?
That's right. The FEPC was created by the executive order. Its purpose was to make sure the order was actually being followed.
Oh, I got it. What could they do? Their job was to investigate complaints. If someone felt they were discriminated against in a defense job or by the government, they could complain to the FEPC.
And the FEPC would.
Yeah.
Find the companies.
Well, that's where it gets tricky. While the FEPC was groundbreaking, it had limitations. It didn't really have strong enforcement powers. It couldn't force compliance easily.
So it could investigate, but maybe not punish effectively.
Exactly. It faced a lot of resistance from employers, even some parts of the government. So there was often a gap between the policy on paper and the reality on the ground.
So it was a step forward, definitely, but not a magic wand for ending discrimination.
Precisely. It was important, don't get me wrong. It documented discrimination, brought it to light, and did help open some jobs, but it couldn't eliminate the problem because it lacked teeth, you know?
Yeah.
But thinking bigger picture, the FEPC set a really important precedent. It established this idea that the federal government had a role, a responsibility in ensuring fair employment. That idea became crucial later for the civil rights movement.
Okay, that makes sense. It's fascinating how these wartime needs and actions started pushing against those existing racial lines. Now, another group active then was CORE, Congress of Racial Equality.
Yes, CORE. They were founded in 1942, right in the middle of the war.
And what was their approach?
They were pioneers in using nonviolent direct action, things like sit-ins, protests, aimed directly at challenging segregation and discrimination.
Even during the war, with everything else going on.
Yes. They firmly believed in tackling injustice at home. They organized protests against discrimination in public places like restaurants or theaters, even while the war raged overseas.
That takes commitment.
It really does. CORE understood, or at least argued, that the fight against fascism abroad was deeply connected to the fight for equality and democracy within the United States itself.
Interesting connection.
Their actions during the war, maybe not always front-page news at the time, were incredibly important. They were honing the strategies of nonviolent resistance, the same kinds of strategies that would become so central to the big civil rights movement later in the 50s and 60s.
So they were kind of laying the groundwork.
Absolutely. Their wartime activism was crucial preparation for major social change to come.
Okay. Now, we need to shift gears a bit and discuss something much darker from this period, the internment of Japanese Americans.
Yes. A truly troubling chapter.
Could you just explain what happened? What was the internment?
It was the forced removal, the imprisonment, really, of over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast.
120,000. That's staggering. Why?
It happened after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was driven by, well, a combination of things. Wartime hysteria, intense fear, suspicion, and frankly, long-standing racial prejudice against Japanese Americans.
And these were American citizens.
The vast majority, yes. Over two-thirds were native-born American citizens. Many had never even been to Japan. It didn't matter. They were targeted based purely on their ancestry.
It's just based on heritage. What were the conditions like for those forced into these camps?
They were harsh. Families were given barely any notice, maybe days or weeks, to get rid of their homes, their businesses, their possessions, often selling things for next to nothing.
Huge losses then.
Devastating losses. Then they were transported, often under armed guard, to these hastily built camps, usually in really remote, desolate parts of the country. Barracks, barbed wire.
Living conditions.
Cramped, basic, often inadequate sanitation, difficult climates. It was about the loss of freedom, dignity, property, community, all because of where their ancestors came from. A terrible violation of civil liberties.
It's just so hard to comprehend that happening in the U.S. And this wasn't just a local decision, right? This went to the highest levels. It was even upheld by the Supreme Court.
Yes, in the Korematsu v. the United States case. That was in 1944.
What was the case about?
Fred Korematsu was an American citizen of Japanese descent who refused the order. He didn't report to an assembly center for relocation. He challenged the constitutionality of the whole thing.
And the Supreme Court?
The Supreme Court sided against him. They upheld the exclusion orders and the internment policy.
On what grounds?
The majority opinion argued it was justified by military necessity during wartime, that the government had the right to take this action to protect against potential espionage or sabotage, even though there was no actual evidence of widespread disloyalty among Japanese Americans.
A military necessity. Wow. That sounds like a justification that could cover almost anything in wartime.
It's a very dangerous justification, and the decision is now widely seen as, well, a grave error, a failure of the justice system fueled by racial prejudice and wartime fear.
Has it been overturned?
Not formally overturned by the Supreme Court in the sense of reversing that specific case decision, but its legal reasoning has been thoroughly discredited and condemned, including by later Supreme Courts. And importantly, the U.S. government did eventually issue a formal apology in the late 1980s and provided some reparations to survivors.
So it stands as a warning then?
A powerful warning about the dangers of racial discrimination, the suspension of civil liberties in times of crisis, and how we balance security with fundamental rights. It forces us to ask really hard questions.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Okay, one more specific event from the home front during the war. The Zoot Suit riots. This sounds very different. What happened there?
Yeah, this was different. The Zoot Suit riots were a series of violent clashes, mostly in Los Angeles, in the summer of 1943.
Riots between who?
Primarily between white American servicemen, sailors, soldiers, and young Mexican-American men. Many of these young men wore distinctive outfits called zoot suits.
Zoot suits. What were
Yeah.
they? Big, flashy suits.
Yeah, kind of. They had high-waisted baggy pants that pegged at the ankles and long coats with wide lapels and padded shoulders, often worn with a hat and maybe a long watch chain. It was a specific style.
Okay. And this style led to riots. Why?
Well, on the surface, some people saw the suits as unpatriotic. They used a lot of fabric, which seemed extravagant during wartime rationing.
The rationing angle.
But that was really just a pretext. For the young Mexican Americans, the zoot suit was more about cultural identity, self-expression, maybe a little bit of youthful rebellion.
So a culture clash.
Definitely. But underneath that was deep-seated racial prejudice against Mexican Americans, combined with wartime anxieties and tensions. The servicemen, often stationed nearby or on leave, saw the zoot suiters as, I don't know, different, maybe even un-American or delinquent.
So what actually happened during the riots?
Groups of servicemen essentially went hunting for young men in zoot suits. They would roam the streets, pull them out of cars, bars, movie theaters, beat them up, strip them of their suits, and humiliate them.
That's targeting people based on clothing.
Yes, but the clothing was a marker for their ethnicity and perceived difference. And what was really disturbing was the reaction of the authorities.
The police.
Yeah. Reports suggest the police often did little to stop the servicemen. In many cases, they actually arrested the victims, the zoot suiters, for disturbing the peace or vagrancy, while letting the attackers go.
That's appalling. So the victims were blamed.
Often, yes. The riots highlighted a real breakdown of justice and the pervasive discrimination faced by the Mexican-American community.
What was the longer-term impact of these riots? What did they reveal?
They starkly revealed the deep racial tensions simmering beneath the surface of American society, even during a war supposedly fought for democracy. It showed the hypocrisy, right? Fighting fascism abroad while allowing this kind of prejudice and violence at home. It was a wake-up call about the discrimination Mexican Americans faced.
It really underscores that the home front wasn't some unified, harmonious place for everyone, does it?
Not at all. World War II was incredibly complex for minority groups. It wasn't a simple story of everyone just pulling together.
So let's try to pull these threads together. We've talked about opportunities and discrimination.
Exactly. The war brought both. The massive need for labor did open some doors, especially for African Americans and women of color in industry, economic chances that maybe weren't there before.
But as you said, often with strings attached, like lower pay or worse conditions.
Right. And those opportunities definitely weren't universal. Just look at the internment of Japanese Americans, the complete opposite of opportunity.
Yeah, that really drives home the contradictions. Fighting tyranny overseas.
While enacting policies based on racial prejudice and fear at home, the internment is such a stark, painful example of how civil liberties can be just swept aside during wartime panic. It's a sobering lesson.
But amidst the challenges, we also saw the seeds of change being sown, right, through activism.
Absolutely crucial. Groups like Randolph's March on Washington movement, even just the threat of it, and CORE's nonviolent actions, they were actively challenging the status quo during the war.
Pushing back against discrimination.
Yes, and in doing so, they were building momentum, developing strategies, and really laying vital groundwork for the much larger civil rights movement that would explode in the decades after the war. Their wartime efforts were incredibly significant.
So if we had to summarize the impact of WWII on minorities in the U.S., what are the key takeaways?
I'd say it was a real turning point, but a very mixed one. There was some progress, definitely driven by wartime needs and by determined activism. Job opportunities opened up for some.
Okay.
But there were also profound injustices and setbacks. The internment stands out, obviously. The Zoot Suit riots show the violence that could erupt. Discrimination remained widespread.
So progress and prejudice existing side by side.
Exactly. I think ultimately the war acted as a catalyst. It threw the contradictions in American society, fighting for freedom abroad while denying it to many at home, into really sharp relief. And that tension, that awareness, helped fuel the growing demand for civil rights and equality that defined the post-war era.
It really reshaped things, didn't it? Okay, that gives us a lot to think about. And on that note, maybe some questions for our listeners to ponder.
Good idea.
First off, how did the sheer need for wartime production actually change the kinds of jobs available to minority groups? Were these changes lasting?
And thinking about Randolph and CORE, In what specific ways did the experiences and the activism of minorities during World War II contribute to the rise of the big civil rights movement later on?
Also, regarding the internment, what were the main arguments used to justify it at the time? What does that whole episode teach us today about fear, prejudice, and civil liberties during wartime?
And maybe consider events like the Zoot Suit riots. How did racial tensions actually play out? How did they manifest on the American home front during the war?
And finally, stepping back, what do you think are some of the lasting impacts, the legacies of these wartime experiences of minorities on American society as we know it today?